And now for something altogether new.
Altogether different, yeah. So we did something in first service I think we'll do again. To get started, we didn't want to play an improv game because that would be more show than sermon. And we also didn't want to take questions because that felt a little less risky. We've answered a lot of questions on our feet that were just phrased. So what we did was take one person to just give us a letter from the alphabet. And Ellen Raff, you're the first person I see. And it'll be just a couple of minutes of free association, and it'll hopefully get where it's going. So you want to give us a letter? Well, we had that one in the first service.
That was the first service.
K.
Okay. Kant.
Immanuel Kant. So we've gone immediately to a German transcendentalist philosopher.
But Kant, let's just go
with him.
Okay, so the one thing I remember about Kant, and everybody expects us to remember everything from theology. I remember almost nothing, But the one thing I remember from Kant was that deep notion of trust, and it relates. I related it in something I wrote a long time ago. That his notion that we must lie back into the hands of God, like the poem that's been read here many times by the UU poet Philip Booth, I think it was, who was teaching his daughter to swim in the current of Maine in the current that was heading out to the ocean, and he said, "Lie back, daughter, lie back," and in a sense saying, trust what is there, And Kant, whenever I think of Kant, I think of that. So this is free association on the letter K. But I think it's an interesting thing. I think I've always thought of, and I grew up Unitarian, I've always thought of Unitarians as trust-challenged people. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's interesting because at our basis, what defined us as a tradition, even before thoughts about who Jesus was our thought about who people were. And the idea that there's something inherently good about us is something that you would think, if you really believe that, changes the way you live and the way you think about how human beings are supposed to live together and how governments work. But I don't live my life, even though I want to, day to day, assuming that the next human being I'm going to encounter, even though that's my desire, necessarily walk into that thinking, oh, everything's going to go fine because they have some deep seed of goodness in them and their intention is going to be perfect. But here, I think, and maybe it's not as much in this congregation, Unitarian Universalists can be criticized at large for kind of a distrust of authority or a distrust of anything that came before, or I don't know, I wonder where the anxiety is.
Yeah.
Is someone out there to get us?
They are. No.
But that's the point. Daniel and I, we both talked about today this trust being partly in each other, that we're not going to be hiding away in our office secretly memorizing some great parable.
You didn't do that?
No, I didn't do that. But also of the congregation, that if today totally went sour, something would still be okay.
Yeah. I like how you made it personal, that notion of trust, how we walk through the world and encounter situations, encounter events. It's hard to get to that moment where you're trusting the people you're encountering. I think we actually are trained, maybe it's this time in this world, to distrust. But all the religious dialogue that's preceded us has said a deep trust in God's hands. So back to the Kant. We can translate that in a lot of different ways. We don't need to think God is puppeteer, right?
Right.
We never talk about God as puppet. But that trust in that things will be okay. Sort of how we're coming to this very moment as well.
I hope it'll be okay.
Yeah.
But that there's that verse that a lot of people, I know a couple of employees have this on their wall from Julian of Norwich. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And I love it. I don't know what well means. When you say everything's going to be okay, okay is so much bigger than me.
Yeah.
Okay is something much bigger than my hopes for my own life or even for the people I love. It's something much grander than just my life or us.
And I think to get to that deep trust, we have to get beyond the immediate, right? Because it's not going to be okay now. I mean, maybe today's going to be okay, but someone in this sanctuary is going to go home and something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, right.
Okay? Sorry. I mean, we deal in life and death. So, this week, two people died in the congregation.
Yep.
That's just the way it is. And so in the short term, if we just have that short view, we can't say all will be well. But I think Julian of Norwich was saying, if we take a real long, extended view of life, all will be well in the end. I mean, I'm thinking about this conversation I had with my 9-year-old son who has all of a sudden got interested in the universe. And we're driving down Mockingbird Lane, and he says, in a million years, the earth is going to just blow up, and it's going to reform, and it's going to start all over. And I like that idea, that in a sense he's got this long-term view of what life really is. So he said, and it might all form again, and human beings will all start over. And I said to him, and maybe one day 2 people will be driving down Mockingbird Lane having this discussion about the world ending. And he looks at me, he's like, yeah. And then I said to him, and maybe it already happened. His eyes started going like that. But it's an interesting way to see one's life, that we are part of something much grander. We tend to hold on very tightly to these moments. In a way, we have to, right?
Well, yeah, you've only got a certain, when the end comes, you'll know exactly how many years you had.
Yeah.
Is that uncomfortable laughter?
And it reminds me of Buddhist bodhisattva vows that I took a long time ago, which were that one always does the work of good, not for one's own benefit, but for the universe yet to come. In some ways, I think there's some truth to living with that feeling of eternity. And religions talk about eternity a lot. But we tend to translate them as, whether we're going to get into heaven or not.
Yeah, right.
But there's something to just living a life with the notion of our being part, a little drop in a huge river.
Which is really beautiful. And yet, there's something frightening about that.
Yes.
That if I'm honest, at some point, forever is a long time.
Yeah.
I really like being alive.
Yeah.
And that there's something that I think can also be, that it's amazing to me that same notion can be as comforting, trusting in that there was an eternity before me. Can it sometimes be oppressive? The idea of forever afterward.
Yeah. And I think that's in part why we have all these religious theories about what happens after we die, right?
Yeah.
Buddhist, Hindu ideas of coming back and reliving and all that, and then Christian ideas of being rewarded or punished and all that, and it's harder, I think, to doubt those things.
Harder, what do you mean?
Harder to live without that end in mind. In other words, we're asking Unitarian Universalists to live with eternity in mind, but not necessarily their eternity.
Yeah, and I've heard it said that we ask people to be good for no reason. But there's something about that says it's not ultimately about whether or not I'm going to benefit by my goodness, because I'm in this long stream of being given a life and capabilities and gifts I didn't necessarily earn or deserve. And it doesn't matter whether I get something out of it on the other side. And that's sometimes a hard leap to make.
And it's faith, and that's when you say the word leap, I hear faith. So, because somebody said to me in the first service, she shook my hand and she said, "You're about to take a leap of faith." I said, "Yeah, that's true." And faith requires a lot more than that. It requires a lot of practice, a lot of finding a grounding in the present as these, in a sense, what we're asking ourselves to do today, and we're asking you all to do. Finding some meaning in what we're living, not just for our lives, but for the good of others. These kinds of these are the practices of faith, in a sense that I hope that we're promoting here on a regular basis.
Well, that's a funny word, right? I mean, you're writing a book on it.
Yeah, if you get me going too long, I'll read it to you.
But that's a funny word for Unitarian Universalists sometimes, because we associate that word somehow with like a reason or believing something just because someone says it's true. But that's not the kind of faith that I hear you talking about at all. It's knowing what's dependable of your trust and loyalty in your life and staying in that as much as you can, I think.
I think so.
How do you feel?
That's a good question. I feel vulnerable.
Okay.
Vulnerability is another part of faith, though.
Huh.
Someone left the first service and said, "You guys were really vulnerable up there, right?" And I wonder when we practice vulnerability.
You and me, or
Everyone.
everybody?
I think sometimes it happens to us. We're placed in a situation, or we're put in a public awkwardness, and then how we respond. And it goes back to that Wu Wei. I love the story of the old man who's been practicing Wu Wei, right? And he goes up with the water and he goes down with the water, and then he lets the power of the river move him. He's still who he is. He's still exercising and preparing for those moments, but when he's in that vulnerability, he allows the forces around him to shape his response, which is an interesting, maybe that's a key to being vulnerable.
And that's hard because I associate a lot of times, and I think a lot of people do, maybe vulnerability and shame together when you talk about something happening to you in a public environment where a lot of people are staring at you. Vulnerability, even though someone thanked us for it after the first service, doesn't always have this really great connotation, because in some way I think we can be, we talked about that, deeply scared of one another.
You and me?
No, not you and me. Not you and me. But just as a people, and that's something that presents a great challenge, especially for people who affirm at our core that there's something deeply good in us.
And yet we walk around protecting ourselves from both the fear and the vulnerability.
Oh yeah, I mean, how hard was it this week not to think of something smart to say? That was so easy for me. I mean,
yeah, of course. I've been thinking about it all week. No,
But that was this huge challenge.
Yeah.
They're going to be looking at us. They're going to be listening. I have to have something.
Yeah.
That momentum is so strong.
Yeah. And we arrived at the moment of the end of that hymn, still with that fear.
Oh yeah.
At least I did.
Yeah, but that's there every week, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe more this week.
Say more.
Well, I every week, people might notice I close my eyes a little bit before I preach and just kind of ask it that everything's going to be okay. I've never had a Sunday where I didn't get up here and boom, 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 right before a sermon. And I guess that's a good thing, and we can obviously trust this group of people to be good to one another, but I don't know. I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I preached a sermon many years ago. It was related to a book called Learning to Fly, I think it was. It was about a guy who took on the trapeze as a hobby and his terror at standing on the platform and watching the swing come forward and back and eventually having to take that leap of faith, right? And that's what I think anyone who sort of speaks the truth or says to their relatives something that they've been meaning to say over Christmas vacation, or just for instance, or makes a hard decision about the direction of their lives, stands on that platform, and we just practice that here on a regular basis. I also have never come to worship without at least a thought about what it was going to be. And so here we are.
It's okay.
So, what we've... I think that's it, yeah?
I think that's good.
What we thought we'd end with was what I said earlier. In so doing, we hold up the spiritual values that you are enough, that life itself is improvisation, that we are not God or in control, that when we shed the noise of life, sometimes we find at the core answers to what is important, and there the creative spirit can bloom. And I think what we're asking you is, where in your life can you create opportunities to meet the creative spirit? We encourage you to trust yourself and trust those around you to find the answers to the questions you're seeking. And that's probably enough.
I think it is.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.